we can look at expert teachers. And again, I just very quickly, if you've got some ideas, what do you think an expert teacher is, or what do you think an expert teacher does? Just very quickly, 30 seconds, put your ideas in the chat box. And we've got already some great ideas: facilitator, inspire, explores, own methods, engagement. Yep. I mean, all of these are obviously great ideas. Again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's impossible to say with any degree of accuracy or even of confidence of what expert teachers do. But if we look at the research and we throw everything into a box, we probably come up with these particular attributes. First of all, an effective teacher is not just effective, they are highly effective. They're experienced. I don't think you can be an effective teacher if you haven't had experience. The question, of course, is how much experience makes you effective? Is it 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, 20 years? These are unknowns. Maybe an effective teacher has been recommended by other people. In other words, they've received good feedback from other people, maybe from their own students, maybe from their peers, maybe from people who have observed them. Maybe the teacher has won an award for their teaching. Hopefully the teacher will have achieved results, and of course achieving results will vary from context to context. And for me, one of the most important ones, and as I said, this list is not exhaustive, it's not definitive, and if you've thought of other things, please don't feel that they're not also relevant. But I think one of the most important things is that effective teachers are constantly thinking about their students. They're prioritizing student learning above and beyond everything else that goes on. So just keeping with this idea of what effective teachers do, I want to show you this lady. This is Tsui, and what she says about expert teachers is that expert teachers are not bothered so much about the routines of what goes on in a classroom, because when something is routine, it's not something that you need to think about too much. It's not something that you need to worry about too much. And if you're not bothered about routines, it means that you can reinvest your time to look at other things, to tackle other problems. So I think, in other words, what she's saying is that expert teachers are always working behind the scenes to improve their teaching, because we're not concerned about the routines of everyday teaching. Now, those of you that are able, think back to your first days as teaching. I can certainly remember my first day. In fact, I can't remember the teaching, but what I can remember is the planning. I can remember spending hours and hours and hours and hours worrying over what I was going to do in the classroom the next day, and preparing and teaching one of my friends what I was going to teach in the classroom the next day. I was completely, my time and my efforts were completely invested in the routine of getting through those, I don't know, was it 45, 50 minutes? I can't remember, but it was certainly a relatively short amount of time that I was actually preparing for. And I probably put in hours and hours and hours of preparation into that one particular lesson. Of course, nowadays, and I'm sure many of you are in the same position, I don't need to invest so much time in the routine, and I can focus more on adding variety, if you like, into my teaching. Now, my friend and colleague Matt, who's not with us today, both of us are football fans. This is not a picture of Matt, it's not a picture of me. This is a picture of somebody whom we both admire greatly, Sir Alex Ferguson. You may remember him as the manager of Manchester United for a long time, and you may be thinking, well, why is he on the screen? Well, he's here because in his autobiography, he wrote this, and I think it's, yeah, I adore him as well. Somebody's saying they adore him. He wrote something which I think is very relevant for us as teachers and trainers, and he said this: so Sir Alex says that a true winner is somebody who's relentless. In other words, they never stop. The very best best players, and let's replace player with teacher. They compete against themselves to become as good as they can be. They just have a built-in desire to excel and to improve. So effective teachers are not satisfied with just being effective. They want to be highly effective. And this is something which comes from inside. It's a desire to want to improve. So effective teachers then, remember, while they may have that desire, they're also going to need help in order to build on their experience, in order to become an expert in their field. And I think a question we need to ask ourselves then is the one that Weston and Clay mention, is that we need to be asking ourselves, how can we develop teachers into evaluative practitioners? And I've mentioned already in my talk that we want our teachers to think back. We want our teachers to reflect. And indeed, I've asked you yourselves to do this today. I've asked you to reflect on several things. We want our teachers to evaluate themselves as classroom practitioners. And only by doing that can we really come up with some sort of understanding of what an effective teacher actually does. And this brings me into the last part of what I want to talk to you about today, and that's teacher learning. And I want you again to reflect on yourselves as teachers and also yourself as learners, and just ask yourself some questions. Again, you don't need to write in the chat box if it's not necessary, but I do want you to think. So my first question then is, how have you actually learned your teacher knowledge? Where does your teacher knowledge actually come from? And as I say, you don't need to write anything, but please just think to yourselves in response to that question. Where has your teacher knowledge actually come from? And maybe for some of us, it's been very much learning on the job, learning as you do it. Maybe you were thrown in at the deep end. I certainly was. When I first started teaching, I was literally thrown into a classroom with not a clue about what I was supposed to be doing. Hopefully I've improved slightly over the last 40 years. Maybe for others that there was a period of training, a period of studying before teaching in the classroom. So these are things that we need to consider, where we've actually learned, where we've actually got our teaching knowledge from. I think I don't want to linger on the current COVID crisis which we're all going through. I don't know about you, but prior to a month ago, I had actually done very few webinars, and I suddenly had to improve my knowledge about how to do online training with teachers. And assuming that what I knew a month ago would help me for what I'm doing right now, this moment, it was something that had to be done differently. And I've very much learned on the job in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I've probably delivered, I don't know, probably about a dozen webinars now in the last 3 to 4 weeks, whereas normally I wouldn't have done a dozen in a year. So I've very much learned on the job. I certainly haven't had time to go through any studying or training before doing any sort of online work. I think we also need to remember that all of us have spent, or all of us did spend, thousands of hours in classrooms as students before we began to learn how to actually teach in the classroom. We observed teachers, our own teachers at primary school and secondary school, at college, and this is what Lortie calls an apprenticeship of observation. And this, of course, creates a very strong sense of teacher behaviors. In other words, we observe the model, we observe the teacher, and we get to understand how teachers actually behave in the classroom. Of course, that doesn't mean that all the teacher behaviors that we observe were positive ones, but many may actually reappear in our own classrooms. But let's think about what we do now. What do we do now to learn more about our profession? What do we do now to learn more about teaching? Now, I'm just checking, and I think we've got just under 3,000 of you in the webinar room at this moment. So at least 3,000 of you are here in response to my question on the screen there. What do you do now to learn more about teaching? Well, you're here. You've signed up for this webinar. So that's a very, very good example of what you actually do in order to learn more about teaching. And I'm coming to the end now, but I want to show you one more footballer. It's interesting that footballers seem to have a lot to say about our profession. I think there are always lots of crossovers between different skills and different professions. Yeah, this is Ronaldinho. And Ronaldinho said, and again, in his autobiography, I think he's too young to have an autobiography, but anyway, he does. And he said this, that often a footballer, and let's change that for teacher, often a teacher doesn't have the time to think too much. It's instinct that gives the orders. And I'm sure many of you are incredibly busy in your jobs as teachers, and it's probably true that you don't have a lot of time to think about what you do. And there's something instinctive that makes you do what it is that you do in the classroom, and it's those instincts, it's those perceptions, it's those understandings of ourselves as teachers that we need to be constantly drawing on. Somebody just mentioned Bill Shankly, who was Liverpool, so I'm not happy with that comment. Let's move on to round up what I want to talk to you about this morning. Let's remember that not all teacher learning revolves around the trainer. In other words, what you learn as teachers doesn't always revolve around somebody talking to you as I am this morning. And it's very important for us as trainers, and those of you in the room today who want to become a trainer or improve your skills, that we must never patronize our audience. We must never think of our trainee teachers as blank slates, because they're not. Everybody brings something to the context which we're working in the same way that every student brings something into the classroom context. So we need to be asking ourselves the question all the time, where else do teachers actually learn from other than from a trainer? And of course, teachers learn primarily for themselves and from their own experience. The important thing for us as trainers is that we get teachers to reflect on their experiences and to learn from them. Teachers will, of course, learn from their peers, from their colleagues, other teachers, other educators, as we're doing now, but also through reading and through watching YouTube and all of the other resources. But sorry to repeat myself, but I think it's really important that we just reinforce this point, that the best place that teachers learn from is from their own beliefs and their assumptions. And of course, these beliefs and these assumptions will be linked in to a teacher's own actual teaching experience. We're just about out of time, so I want to quickly conclude what I want to say to you today. I think overall, or to summarize, that the trainer's role is very much a balancing act. And what we're trying to do is to help teachers to think about three P's, not Jeremy Harmer's 3 P's, not present, practice and produce, but the personal P, the professional P, and the practical P. Those are the 3 P's that we need trainers to focus on if we want the trainer to help the teacher as much as possible. So the 3 P's are basically, the first one is the personal, and this is what a teacher has. This is the teacher's knowledge and their experiences and all of those beliefs and assumptions. And these are the real foundations of how people teach. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all need to bring that to the context within which we're working. I'm jumping the second P to take us immediately to the third P, which is the practical. Because as I said, there's a very strong link between the personal and the practical. This is what teachers do. They teach based on their knowledge and their experiences. And as I say, these are the fundamental foundations of what we actually do. But those of you who are in the room now, 2,915 of you, you are the second P. you are the professional P, because you're actively thinking about research and theory and what other practitioners like myself, how does all of that impact on what you already know? So you're building on what you already know. And by putting those first two P's together, you will become much, much more effective in the third P, on the practical side. So yes, everybody, no matter what their skill or their profession is, you need the personal side. But what's more important is the professional side. It's what you're doing today that is going to make you a more effective teacher. So my final conclusion is just to say that there's no right or wrong way in what we're doing. There's no good or bad. I need to reinforce that as a trainer, you can never really know what it is that a teacher needs. But what we can do is encourage teachers to take risks and to look at change. As I said earlier, nobody likes change, least of all teachers, because the routines and the things which are familiar are the safest ones. But something that I wrote a few years back is that change in the classroom is always going to be difficult. So my advice from trainers to teachers, and teachers to each other, is just to have a go and see what happens, because there may be a lot of very, very pleasant surprises. So that brings me to the end. I've come right up to my 60 minutes. So I apologize if we don't have an enormous lot of time for question and answer, but I don't know, Simbella, if there's anything that anybody wants to ask.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Willing to try something, and it goes back again to something that I mentioned. It's the job of a trainer is not just to show the teachers what. More importantly, it's why. Anybody can dish up, a whole host of activities that teachers can use in the classroom, but the good trainers will help teachers to understand why they should be doing that activity, the rationale behind it, and any training situation which is introducing something new to teachers should provide them with ample opportunity to reflect on that activity and to think about how they might introduce it into their own teaching.
Great. It's that's probably hit many of the questions on the head. Great. Because many of them have asked a similar thing here in the comments and questions. And then I guess winding down, I pulled out some lovely comments that lots of thanks coming from you all. If you're happy to wind up, Peter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I really liked Alia Mahrous, who said, what is good with your sessions is that you open the door for thinking and meditating, or meditating perhaps, about our teaching. And thanks for this. And lots are asking for your personal email address.
But it's public knowledge, so I don't have a problem with that.
So yeah, you can contact us. Peter's email address is there on the slide, and you can contact us at Cambridge MENA as well at the email address cambridgemena@cambridge.org. And thank you so much for all of your praise and your compliments coming through. They're really wonderful to see, and we're so glad that this has been so useful.
Thank you very much, Simbella.
Great session, Peter.
Thank you, and thanks to all who've attended. Raz, I think we need to put the link up for everybody.
Yeah, so everyone, lots of questions about the certificates. As you can see, there are thousands and thousands of teachers attending. So please bear with us, and thank you for your patience while we get your surveys and certificates processed. It may take a few days, so please don't expect them instantly as soon as you fill in the survey, but be sure to fill in the survey so that you get your certificate sent to you eventually when we can process them. Raz, is there anything you want to say on that for technical sides? The technical side of getting the surveys done?
Thanks, Simbella. Thanks, Peter, for the wonderful webinar. Yeah, I think, I've put up the survey link now. please expect 3 to 4 working days. We'll be sending out the survey certificates this week. So you'll be started receiving the certificates. And one more thing to add on the technical aspect: when you fill in the survey, please make sure that you put your proper full name. So whatever you put in the survey is going to be on the certificate. So if you put incorrectly, then it's going to be incorrect in the certificate as well. So please make sure you put your proper name in the survey. All right, that's the only thing I wanted to add up.
Great, thank you, Raz. And a lot of people are also asking about recordings. All the webinars will be recorded, and we'll be sharing them with you once all the questions are done.
Yeah, so regarding the recordings, so we'll be compiling all the webinar recordings